And they found that the 202 voters in Precinct 13 of Jim Wells County had voted in alphabetical order. And all of them had signed in using the same pen and the same handwriting. Indeed, several of them who had voted were out of state when the voting occurred. There was no vote by mail at that time.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another great episode of WTF History. And we want to thank everybody for, God, I can't believe how many people are watching our stuff, Mike. It makes me feel good that so many people love history and
It's
really love the stuff of history that we love, which is the stuff they don't teach you in school.
it's weird to say millions of people have watched us, but millions of people have watched us, and we're flattered.
Yeah, really flattered. Because actually, I don't know if we think we have all that much to offer. So let's see what we do. We're entering the election season here in the United States because we know a lot of our listeners are not in the United States, or a lot of our viewers are not in the United States. But in November, we're going to have a presidential election here. And so we thought we would bring our viewers some election stories. And why don't you go first?
So I have a story that is perhaps the craziest election story ever. It's certainly the craziest one I've ever read. And it brings together so many themes that are still relevant today. There's questions of voter fraud. There's issues with the Supreme Court. It involves a senatorial election that morphed into and had effects on a presidential election. And it also involves a part of the world that my co-host is intimately familiar. That is the great state of Texas.
Ah, my homeland.
So, David,
Land of my birth. Hey, before you get started though, Mike, I want to add, if you study history, especially if you study American history and you watch the news, you will go crazy because you will hear all of these politicians and all of these newscasters say, "This is the most important election of all time. This is unprecedented." It's like, dude, for 200 years they've been saying that.
yes,
But unlike everybody has this case of presentism where they think everything that happens now, right, is the first time has ever happened.
oh, we will actually talk about that toward the end of this vignette. But I'm going to start, I guess, with a question, which is, David, remind our viewers what part of Texas you're from.
I am from Corpus Christi area, Rockport, Corpus
I am
Christi.
so glad you said that because we're going to go right back to that area to some neighboring counties. And our story starts in 1941, and this is a special election for the U.S. Senate. And it pits this young, ambitious congressman that very few people had heard of from outside Texas.
Johnson?
Yeah, his name is Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Yeah.
And he's running against a guy named William Lee O'Daniel, who everybody simply called Pappy.
Yeah, kind of like Beto,
Yeah, exactly. Except
right?
he actually won some elections, right?
Yeah,
But
right.
so Pappy O'Daniel was a character. I mean, he was really like sort of the last gasp of the Old West, or one of the last gasps of the Old West. And there's going to have a second last gasp of the Old West in this story. But Pappy O'Daniel ran a flour company. Some people say Bisquick. It wasn't Bisquick, but he ran a flour company. And his real love in life, though, was a Western swing band called the Hillbilly Boys.
I've
And
heard
so
of him.
in his 1941 senatorial election, they traveled around Texas, the vast, vast distances of Texas, with sort of a roadshow. And they had a hit song. Their hit song was called Pass the Biscuits, Pappy. And, now, folks, you're laughing, but this is what David grew up listening to.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah.
So, but
Grew up still.
still, yeah.
Like, yeah.
Actually, some viewers who are big cinephiles will remember the Coen Brothers movie, "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," which is loosely based on this campaign.
Okay.
So LBJ campaigned hard too, and which was very common during that era. He put out lengthy, detailed position papers on every single issue, on the finer points of every issue, and he was prepared when his train would stop at any little town to talk about the finer points of tariff policy and Texas cotton and all these other issues. And so, for that reason, most newspapers, most forecasters were positive, they were sure that Congressman Lyndon Baines Johnson was going to win. But as the votes came in, many of them long after Election Day, and you see where these themes are still relevant, it was
hmm
Pappy
hmm
O'Daniel who was on top. and he defeated Lyndon Johnson by 1,300 votes. Now, LBJ was not a guy to rest on his laurels. He was not a guy to take a loss. He was not a guy to take a loss easily. So he immediately tried to figure out what happened, right? I mean, and David, you got this personality. I do too. I mean, he was like, how did I lose to Pass the Biscuits Pappy, right? Like, how is that possible, right? Was the electorate just that base, or what was it? He soon found out that in Texas, starting near Corpus Christi, where you grew up, and continuing sort of in both directions, there are these counties that a lot of people call the border counties, and that played a outsized relevance in that campaign. LBJ, of course, was from the Austin area. He was from Texas Hill Country. He was from just around the border between Texas Hill Country and the city of Austin. And he started touring these border counties. And when he licked his wounds, when he and his team did his final post stop, or whatever you want to call it, from that 1941 race, he made two vows. And his first vow was never, ever to get beaten again, and also to find out exactly what Pappy O'Daniel had done to beat him. So he started touring these border counties, and he learned what historians have since learned and what y'all are going to learn today. And that is that in one of these border counties was a county called Duval County. David, have you been to Duval County?
I have not. I have not.
All right. So the boss of Duval County was a man named Archie Parr. And the people in Duval County called him the Duke of Duval County. And you might understand that this is where the show, The Dukes of Hazzard, this was where they were originally going. But the character of Boss Hogg was based on Archie Parr. Okay. So when LBJ and his staff toured Duval County, they learned that soda pop, which was 5 cents a bottle in all of Texas, was 10 cents a bottle in Duval County. And when they asked people why, they said, like, why is soda 10 cents here? The people of Duval County stared back at him like he was stupid. And they said, well, that's for the Duke. This guy was powerful enough that in the 1940s, he had a 100% tax on soda, even though he was not in elective office. And he literally collected this tax like a feudal noble, which was amazing. This is 1940s Texas, rural Texas. So in true feudal fashion, when Archie Parr died shortly after this 1941 election, he handed the county to his son, George Parr. He literally passed this county on like a feudal fashion to his son, George. And George became the new Duke of Duval County. And this excited LBJ because there was new blood there that he could start over with. And George Parr built on his dad's power. He was able to take over the neighboring county, which was called Jim Wells County. Now, David, have you been to Jim Wells?
No, but that has a first and a last name as a county?
It does. And here's the crazy thing is that county was named after a prior boss. I mean, like the power of these rural
South Texas.
I mean, just amazing South Texas, right? So now what LBJ learned, and what I was blown away when I read this, right? And hopefully you guys will be blown away too. LBJ learned that the bosses of these counties had their own unique vernacular and their own unique approach when it came to the sacred right of the vote. He was stunned when LBJ and his staff, they heard one county boss talking to another, and this one county boss asked, do you vote them or do you count them? And so, of course, LBJ was stunned to even hear the verb vote used with an object, right? Like, do you brand your cattle? People typically say, oh, yes, I vote, but do you vote them? It's like so weird, right? Do you brand your cattle? And he was about to learn soon what the phrase, do you count them, also means. So in some border counties, they voted them. And them referred to poor rural Mexican Americans and poor rural whites. And to vote them was to offer them $1 and a shot of tequila or whiskey to go in the box and vote, and to vote the right way. And, Yes, I mean, you could argue, right? This was buying a vote in a weird way, but at least they voted in their own hand. At least they were showing up and they were voting and they went through the process. In some counties, the bosses were so powerful that they just counted up the vote result that they wanted. They reported it and they certified it, and that was that. So LBJ befriended these border county bosses. When the time came, he was ready to call on them again. So now it's 1948, and LBJ returns from serving in World War II. He's still a congressman from the Austin Hill Country area. And Pappy O'Daniel is not running for reelection. And he's proven to be totally ineffective. Imagine that. So LBJ excitedly declares that he's running for the Senate again. But he soon finds out his excitement turns into disappointment when he learns who he's running against. He is running against a Texas legend.
The Duke?
No, Coke.
Oh.
He's running against Coke Stevenson, the popular governor of Texas. And Coke Stevenson, in his own way, was the last gasp of the Old West. He was born in a log cabin. He was too poor for law school. So he studied law books by a campfire as he drove cattle across the Texas plains. Then he took the bar exam and was smart enough to pass. And LBJ is like, oh crap, I'm running against this legend.
He's kind of like a Southern version of Abraham Lincoln.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And, in Texas, there's Coke Stevenson Elementary near Coke Stevenson Highway. And yeah. So, it's a hard-fought campaign. LBJ pioneers the use of this new device to campaign, the helicopter, right? And but the results come in on election night, and Coke Stevenson is ahead. But then the results from the border counties start coming in, and LBJ is slowly closing the lead. But it's not enough. It's the last day of tallying, and with the results tallied, Coke Stevenson had prevailed by 111 votes in the whole state of Texas. But then Jim Wells County contacted the voting officials and reported that they got some late arriving results. In fact, Precinct 13 of Jim Wells County reported 200 votes, even for Lyndon Johnson, against 2 for Coke Stevenson. And the county board the state board got all their election results. So this was it. And they certified the election that LBJ had prevailed in the entire state by 87 votes.
Oh my God.
87 votes. Now, Coke Stevenson, he's not a dummy. He had a sense of what happened, and he chose to fight. He did some discovery, and he called on the Texas Rangers, actually, to go out to Jim Wells County and see some evidence. And they found that the 202 voters in Precinct 13 of Jim Wells County had voted in alphabetical order. And all of them had signed in using the same pen and the same handwriting. Indeed, several of them who had voted were out of state when the voting occurred. There was no vote by mail at that time. They were
that happens. That happens.
So it became clear, actually, that nobody had voted in Precinct 13 of Jim Wells County. And they started getting affidavits from people. And they started talking with voters. And voters said, yeah, well, when I showed up to the polls to vote, I was greeted by a 300-pound Mexican-American gentleman who lifted up his gut fat
to show his gun.
Pistols. Right?
Yeah. And, that's a good place to hide it, by the way.
It's a great place to hide them. So, folks, Jim Wells County did not vote him. It just counted him. So Stevenson took the case to court. Now, Johnson appointed his fixer, his personal attorney, Abe Fortas, to the case.
Huh. Sounds interesting.
And Fortas spoke with President Truman, among others. And the county, Jim Wells County, refused to turn over the box that contained the ballots from Precinct 13. And soon a federal judge had dismissed the case, and Johnson had won by 87 votes. Now, what happened to the main players? Well, this election put Landslide Lyndon, as they called him, on the course to become president. Right? We all know that piece of history. And amazing what this did to the trajectory of our nation, right? Vietnam War, all these things that really shaped our nation in the 1960s. The people implicated with Box 13, they posed for a picture with Box 13 with gigantic smiles on their faces.
Box 13.
With Box 13, and you could see some of the folks in the picture that I talked about. Coke Stevenson became so disenchanted with Democratic Party politics. This was a Democratic primary. That was all that was competitive in Texas at the time. That Coke Stevenson, a Texas legend, re-registered as a Republican, and his popularity started turning the state of Texas from blue to red. Now, the 300-pound pistol-toting henchman, Luis Salas, later confessed to everything on his deathbed 30 years later.
Which would have been, hold it, when was that? Was that like in the 90s?
No, the 1970s. 1970s.
Oh, so it was way too late.
Yeah, way too late. Yeah. George Parr, the Duke of Duval, who also ran Jim Wells County, who just counted him, he was convicted of tax evasion. And in 1968, President Lyndon Johnson called him and said, you know what? You ought to give up control of these counties, which he did. He abdicated in favor of his own son, which is crazy. The third generation Duke of Duval. And a few years later, George Parr was found shot to death on his ranch. Now, and when LBJ became president, he got the ability to appoint a Supreme Court justice. And he appointed a little-known attorney from Texas with no judicial experience whatsoever. And that guy's name, of course, was his fixer, Abe Fortas. Now, those who watched us, right, you know that me, David, neither of us, we're not conspiracy theorists. But what we talked about at the beginning is also relevant here, and it's worth talking about again, which is presentism. We tend to think that our own era is unique. And right. We think that everything has been solved, right? Modern science will never get debunked. Nobody will ever know more than we know in the present. The present is pure. The past was corrupt. Our morals are better than the past. And we tend to think that fraud and corruption has largely been consigned to the past. And I'm sure there were people reading in 1948 who were like, well, that was a close election. I mean, what a lucky fellow that Lyndon Johnson is.
Right. I feel like a biscuit.
Yeah. But they had no idea until 30 years later. And most still don't know this story.
Nobody knows this story, man.
Right. And it makes you think. I'm just going to leave it at this. It makes you think what 30 years from now they will be saying about our elections today.
Right. Look, man, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm just a real theorist. Like, it's not a conspiracy if people are actually doing it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So this happens every single day all around the world. And it has been happening, for what? 6,000 years since we have had communities and governments, back to the Acadians, which are my favorites, by the way. I love the Acadians.
You've got a crazy election story too.
Well, it's not that crazy though. It's not gonna get the same reaction that yours has. Mine is more of a sanguine, right? Because I feel bad that this person has been forgotten. I think a lot of people refer to her as a black nominee for president, right? On the ticket for the November election, right? Not a primary, but the big deal. But people, forget that there are people before these people that made it all possible. So if I were to ask you, Mike, who was the first black woman to run for president, who would you say?
Gosh, that is a great question. And here I should say that I am ashamed that I don't know the answer. I could
what?
I could speculate, but I would probably.
Okay, yeah, that's okay. I don't think most people would nowadays. Maybe in the late 70s, people could remember. But I think most people would say Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm was the first black congresswoman. She was not the first female of color congresswoman. Do you know who that was? I only ask you because I think you might know because you're such a geek about this.
God, what? I'm drawing two blanks today, and now you made me look bad.
Yeah, it was Patsy Mink, and she was from Hawaii. So she was elected in 1965. I could be wrong about that. But she was elected in 1965. And Shirley Chisholm was or 64, one of those. We could figure it out. If I'm wrong, we'll put it down here. But she was elected a cycle ahead. And in 1968, Shirley Chisholm was elected to Congress, and she was a Black woman, very, very strong woman from what an area that is now, numbers change, right? So I like to go by the areas like you did. It's the area now represented by Hakeem Jeffries.
Wow.
So Bedford-Stuy, the Bedford-Stuyvesant area there. So she represented that area, but she was the first. It was a big deal in the late 60s when Shirley Chisholm was elected. And in 1972, Shirley ran for president. She ran for the nomination as a Democrat. And as you know, in 1972, that whole thing was locked up, right? I think in 72, what Shirley just wanted was to get some leverage from delegates so that she can have an influence on the appointments. Like she wanted an indigenous person appointed as head of Interior. She wanted some people from urban areas to be the head of HUD. So, she had some, I think, progressive appointment ideas that she wanted to just try and get leverage for. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to do that. The folks folded. But I think if you know history, people might say Shirley Chisholm in 1972. But it wasn't her. And also, Shirley wasn't the nominee for the party. Shirley was running to be the nominee for the party, right? She was running for the Democrat nomination. There's a difference. Yeah. The first person was someone who's been completely forgotten by history, and it kind of makes me sad. Her name was Charlene Mitchell. And in 1968, the same year that Shirley Chisholm was elected to Congress, Charlene Mitchell was actually her party's nominee in the general election in November. She ran for the Communist Party. Now, people might go, that's a third party, blah, blah, blah. Hey, man, if you're on that ballot in November, you're on the ballot in November.
Let's not forget that the Communist Party, right, which started right around 1900, it actually won electoral votes, right? What didn't Eugene Debs win electoral votes?
Yes,
on his ticket from prison in like the 20s.
Yes, so Eugene Debs.
This was a real party in the United States.
It was a legit party. So Charlene Mitchell, she was born in Cincinnati in 1930. Very, very politically active. She came from a very politically active family, like extremely politically active. They moved to Chicago. Her father was a precinct captain in Chicago, and I think if you know anything about Chicago politics, you know that is, those are real deals there. And she started kind of, I want to say messing with the Communist Party at a young age, but she joined the American Youth for Democracy branch of the Communist Party at the age of 16.
I said, that's a household name.
Yeah.
A rite of passage for every
for every young American. So she joined that party. She engaged in sit-ins to break the segregation at the lunch counters. At the age of 13, she was doing sit-ins. She was very, very, very active. She moved to Los Angeles, where she formed the Che Lumumba party. Not party, but the Che Lumumba kind of organization. What that was a branch of the Communist Party for Black Americans. So as you know, Mike, during this era, during the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, what the Communist Party decided to do, and they were very successful, they would go to the poor areas and they would recruit. And if you look back on newsreels and news footage, you will see a lot of young Black Americans, a lot of young Latinos from some of these areas, and they were communists. They were members of the Communist Party, and they were very active.
The working class white ethnics. I love these faux umbrella terms, right? But it was like that was the bulwark of the Communist Party.
Yeah, that really was. That was the bulwark. There at Che Lumumba, she began a lifelong friendship with Angela Davis.
Oh, yeah.
So she and Angela Davis, who is in the United States, she's a very famous activist, Black Panther stuff. She went to prison, it's a deal. Angela Davis we could do a whole story on Angela Davis, but she and Angela Davis ran that down in Los Angeles. And in 1968, the Communist Party decided that she was going to be their nominee in the general election. And she ran with a guy named Mike Zagarel, who was part of the Youth Party. He was director of the Youth Party, and they were on the ballot in 4 states, and they campaigned. Now, they did not win. They did not win. They didn't fare very well at all. but she did it. Like, she was the first Black woman on a November ballot for the presidential election of the United States of America. Then in 1970, after her failed election, she went to work on the defense team. She put the entire defense campaign together for Angela Davis, who by that time had been arrested for her involvement with a murder committed by, some members of the Black Panther Party. If you know anything about history, you know that really kind of took away a lot of the oxygen from social issues in like 1970, 71, 72 in that era. But that was all headed up by Charlene Mitchell afterwards. And then after that, she just became, she kind of settled in, and she did a lot of, she really did a lot of criminal justice issues like that, where she would go and she would find some people who she believed were wrongly incarcerated, and she would do the same for them as she had done for Angela Davis. In 1988, she had moved to New York, and she ran against Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the incumbent for his U.S. Senate seat, another quixotic run for high public office, and she lost. She came in, I think, 4th out of 7. But at this time, she was very, very active. James Baldwin called her the Joan of Arc of Harlem, because she really stood for all of the battles for people who did not have a voice. And in 2007, after that, she became also involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And she went and visited Mandela. She went to South Africa often, and she really applied her skills to trying to end apartheid, which, as we all know, was successful. Unfortunately, in 2007, she had a stroke, and she became partially paralyzed, really impeded her ability to speak, and she went into a nursing home. And for the next, I think, 15 years, she stayed in a nursing home in New York City and died in 2022 at the age of 92. And when she died, it was...
I didn't hear anything in the news in 2022, and
Yeah, that's what I mean. I never heard anything about it, and I'm a political person. I did my research on it, and really the only place it was noted was in, periodicals that deal for the Socialist Party or the Communist Party. They would say, "Oh, hey, this woman who ran for us back in '68 just died. That's too bad." The New York Times had a very small paragraph on it. I think they had mentioned that she was the first Black woman to run for president, which was good. But other than that, I think unfortunately, the United States has completely forgotten about, 1, a trailblazer, and 2, like her or not, like what she's standing for or not, a woman who really put her heart out there and fought for what she believed in. And I hope that this episode allows people to remember Charlene Mitchell, what she did, and the life she lived, and why we should remember people like that when they pass away.
A true trailblazer, and we hope today that we gave everybody out there watching a little bit of history that's not taught in school. So obviously, you learned about a crazy instance of voter fraud in 1948 that led to the presidency in 1968. And then in 1968, you learned about that there was already a woman running for president of the United States in 1968. What a trailblazer she was. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Don't forget to throw us a like if you could. Throw us a comment if you want. Tell us how much we got wrong or how much we got right. And above all, share this with all your friends and tell them how much you love this show. Thanks, everyone.
All right, man. Thanks. Bye. Hey, if you like what you hear, like and subscribe. It really means a lot, and we would love to have you coming back every week. Thank you.